Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it just a couple of seconds for people to get situated and on, and then we will jump right in with our Talking Transit event this morning. Good morning, and welcome to CMT's latest Talking Transit on St. Louis housing prices near transit study, the results. We can't wait to hear those this morning. So, on behalf of Citizens for Modern Transit, we welcome you. I'm Kim Sella. I'm the CEO of CMT. We are happy to have the opportunity to host this discussion this morning in partnership with the St. Louis Realtors. I want to welcome any of the CMT board members who have joined us today, and special thanks to our platinum sponsors that make these events possible, including AARP in St. Louis, Bi-State Development, HNTB, and the St. Clair County Transit District. We appreciate your support. Public transit is a critical component of any region's transportation system, whether you ride it or not. And we say that all the time at Citizens for Modern Transit. However, there are additional benefits delivered many communities struggle to fully recognize and clearly communicate, including the value of transit brings to the economy and the overall quality of life. So we took this opportunity to commission research in partnership with the St. Louis Realtors to look at one benefit that sometimes exists under the radar, the impact of public transit on property values. As the St. Louis region continues to explore bus rapid transit along the cities of St. Louis's Northside-Southside corridor, we're going to take a look at the potential impact of possible large-scale investment in bus rapid transit or any type of transit on property values in the city of St. Louis with the help of the Center for Neighborhood Technology. Today, we're going to hear the results of the research on where we stand and also on where we stand currently with the bus rapid transit study underway in the city of St. Louis. So let's welcome our panel that has joined us this morning. We have Justin Romeo. He's the managing director with the Center for Neighborhood Technology. Paul Essling is the senior analyst with the Center for Neighborhood Technology. Charlie Hendeleiter is the Chief Advocacy Officer and Director of Commercial Services with the St. Louis Realtors. And Scott Ogilvie is the Planning Executive Transportation with the City of St. Louis. There's a lot to be excited about in the St. Louis region right now when it comes to transit. We have an opening of an extension of Metrolink to Mid-America St. Louis Airport. This is the first extension of Metrolink to open in 2 decades. At the same time, we have this study underway within the city of St. Louis. So it's essential that we continue to learn from other cities about how to effectively tell the story of transit expansion so that St. Louisans understand its value and can get on board, as I said earlier, whether they ride it or not. So our panelists with the Center for Neighborhood Technology will provide an overview of the study and the results they saw. The St. Louis Realtors are going to share about their work in this space, and we will get an update from the city, thanks to Scott, on where the BRT study stands today. As a reminder, please submit your questions using the QR feature, the question and answer feature, or the chat box, and we will get to those as quickly as possible. So let's turn it over to Charlie first with the St. Louis Realtors to talk a little bit about why you're on board with this study, Charlie, and then we're going to turn it over to the Center for Neighborhood Technology. So welcome, Charlie, and thank you.
Kim, thanks so much. For us, we're excited to release this report today, and we're excited for the partnership that brought this report to life. And for me, the highlight of this report is that it reinforces something that many of us observed for years. People value connectivity, convenience, and reliable access, and the market responds to that. I want to give a shout out to Hugh Morris at the National Association of Realtors, who helped inspire this work. Hugh's work has involved 2 previous national studies on home values in transit. And the question was, as we look at an expansion of transit in St. Louis, what does that relationship look like here in St. Louis between home values and transit? And I think the partnership behind this is important. St. Louis Realtors, Citizens for Modern Transit, and AARP all approach these issues from different perspectives, but we share common interests: strong communities, access to opportunity, economic vitality, and ensuring people can remain connected to the places that they need to go. From a realtor perspective, transportation and real estate have always been connected. When families decide where to live, they think about access to jobs, schools, healthcare, entertainment, and commute times. When businesses decide where to invest, they think about whether employees and customers can reliably access that area. That means economic development. So this conversation is bigger than transit itself. It's about neighborhood strength, economic competitiveness, and quality of life. I also appreciate that this report combines both national and local evidence. Across multiple cities, we've seen similar trends near high-capacity transit investments like bus rapid transit, and now we have some St. Louis specific data showing patterns here at home. And ultimately, that matters because a healthy real estate market is all about creating places that people want to live, work, invest, and stay. And Kim, thank you so much for working with us on this project.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you for those opening remarks. I really appreciate that to set the scene of where we are with this study. So let's jump in with Paul and Justin to hear the meat of the study. What are the results? Where are we, Paul and Justin? And what could the impact be in St. Louis if we looked at investment similar to what you saw on the national level? So I'm going to turn it over to both of you now.
All right, thank you so much, Kim and Charlie. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today and like sharing the findings that we have from our research project, and also just hearing from you all like questions you have about how this could be applicable to your future work. So I will put up. We have a quick presentation here. Doo. All right, can you all see that all right?
Now we can.
Okay, cool. So again, my name is Justin Romeo. I am the managing director at the Center for Neighborhood Technology. And I have here my colleague Paul Essling with me today, and we're going to be presenting the findings from the research that we did in partnership with the Citizens for Modern Transit and the St. Louis Realtors Association. Tell you a little bit about CMT. So we are a not-for-profit based in Chicago, Illinois, but we work nationally. And we work nationally really on this idea of how do we create innovate, how do we create neighborhoods that are both equitable, sustainable, and resilient. And really, I think getting to a point that Charlie raised is I think that there's a lot of value in community development and creating like strong communities from transit. And I think there's also a relationship between transit and property values that we're going to talk more about today. Transportation is one of the areas that we have worked along a lot with in our 40 plus year history. We talk a lot about equitable transit-oriented development, location efficiency, and as Charlie mentioned, done these partnerships with the National Association of Realtors to really understand the impact of transit on housing value. And I think we think of it as also this idea of like value from a monetary value. So it's great to see like property values increase, but it's also value from a what can you access and community creation, and value for people who live in the neighborhood is really important. So the research today will have kind of focus on two parts. Like we'll start out talking a little bit about, we wanted to look across the country to see, what are the findings that other researchers are putting together around this relationship? Because we have seen sort of repeated evidence um, of the relationship, positive impact that proximity to transit has on housing values. But there's different ways to look at it. There's different ways to analyze it. So one is to just like see what other researchers are seeing and seeing in that environment, and then also going really granular into St. Louis and looking at some property values and like how those changed over time. So Paul will present that in the second half. As part of this research sort of breadth, broad breadth literature review, we looked at things in Vancouver, Eugene, Oregon, Los Angeles, Boston, Hartford, Cleveland, and repeatedly saw this like same pattern where we were seeing the increase in property values to varying degrees, like near transit, and just like this strong relationship for BRT and property values, which is a thing that I think, sometimes is not as intuitive, but I think the idea that we're seeing is that even any investment in a corridor, any investment in an area, like really helps to show the value for properties. So first starting off with our report that we produced back in 2019 with the National Association of Realtors, the Association of Public Transit, the American Public Transit Association and CMT, we saw a 30% increase in property values near BRT in Boston, Massachusetts, as part of our work. This also held across commercial real estate that had an even higher percentage, so 84% compared to 21% increase in commercial properties that were not near transit. In Eugene, Oregon, we saw that there were residential property values that went up nearly 49%, nearly 50% across, as compared to a 5% increase in areas not near transit. Similarly, in Hartford, Connecticut, we saw that there was both residential and commercial property increases similarly. And in Los Angeles, while the relationship wasn't as strong, we did see that there was a really strong growth near the Norfolk station. And I think understandably, like LA is a place where there's just a strong real estate market in general. So not necessarily like uh, uh, poor influence of being near transit, but just a difference in the market. And I think the methods we also saw really hold across the board is like this idea that you want to look out a number of years. So you don't want to be, real estate values take a little while to show their change. But I think even seeing in these like 4 to 5 year periods, like we're seeing an actual real increase, a real meaningful difference between the values of properties near BRT and the values of properties that were not. We also, so other research out of the University of Hawaii, I think really brought in another interesting point for us, this idea that not only is it valuable for properties to be near BRT, but this idea that they're also really more beneficial than their construction costs. And I think this is a thing that we've seen as well across our research is that not only is, high um, fixed rail like service like valuable, but even like BRT from lower cost like and lower time on production can benefit the community. And so we think that this is a strong finding, or thought that this is a strong finding and worth sharing because like I think we understand that there's a lot of work that is going on in BRT across the country, and that I think we want to be able to show just like how valuable that is, even without the longer timescales that go along with and the higher costs that go along with fixed rail transit. Additionally, we saw some work out of the Ohio State University that looked at um, property values near transit and did more of a like, scan across a number of BRT systems, and really seeing this idea that while there was some declines in some of the cities that they saw, like I think brings home the point that it's not just about proximity. I think it's about also the development potential that goes along with it. So development plans that go along with it. Really like this quote that said kind of the only time that there was actually harm was when there wasn't kind of housing and wasn't development near the BRT stations that were being created. So it's this idea really back to the root that community is an important part of it. Transit and real estate go hand in hand. You want people to be able to live near the transit stations you're creating, and when you do that, will see positive and we'll see success. And last study I'll just like mention is some work we saw in Richmond, Virginia. Again, like pushing home the same point. So this idea that transit ridership was increasing and also property values were increasing like near those transit stations. So switching over, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Paul Essling now to talk a little bit more about our St. Louis specific findings. But excited to get your questions about the research about what we've seen so far from our literature review, and then also about our St. Louis specific data. All right, Paul.
Thank you, Justin.
Mhm.
Can you all hear me? Is that Okay,
Yes.
great. Yeah, so as Charlie mentioned earlier, we were involved in the research that Hugh at NAR did in two studies prior, where we looked at transit or home sales near transit and compared that to home sales that were not near transit. Um, and in St. Louis, we took a little bit of a different approach. And since most of St. Louis is near transit, we looked at bus transit in particular, and we looked at it by frequency. So um, we had residential sales from 2012 and 2018. Um, and 2024. And across the city, we found that there was a 50% increase in sale price, median sale price, that is, and 65% over 12 years, 50 over 6 years and 65 over 12. And and then looking more closely at homes near within a half mile um, of these different bus routes, um, we found quite a bit of variation. Um, and in summary, it's very much related to the frequency of the bus service. So the least frequent bus routes, home prices increased um, far less than they did for the most frequent, um, 50% versus 167% for over 12 years. Um, do you want to go to the next slide, Justin? Um, um, there's one bus route in St. Louis at the moment that 13 averaged daytime headways at 13.2 minutes. So the headway is the amount of time someone would have to wait for the next bus. If they just get to the stop and the bus pulls away, they'll have to wait at most 13.2 minutes on average through the day. So um, the Grand Bus has that service, and and these are the sale price increases for homes near the Grand Bus: 144% over 6 years and 167% over 12 years. Um, Compared to the rest of the city, that's a huge difference. Only 43% over 6 years and 58% increase over 12 years. And the next slide will show um, the increases for the different bus routes. So if you want to advance, there you go. So the first two columns there, or bars, are the Grand Bus. There's 7 routes that have daytime service averaging 21 to 30 minutes, and then 19 routes at 31 to 60 minutes, and 8 routes where you have to wait um, over an hour for the next bus. So um, there's some pretty clear correlation here with frequency of service, where more frequent service homes have appreciated more quickly than, or more so than homes away from those. Um, so we looked at some demographics, and it you can, these are some demographics that typically we look at when we're looking at transit riders and 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 maybe those who would more be more dependent on transit service. Well, first of all, the transit commuters, these are the people who take transit to work, and and the darker colors on the map, on the left map, indicate where a higher percentage of the population, working commuters, take transit rather than other modes. And then the map on the right shows the vehicles per household. You can see to the southwest in St. Louis, there's far more households with more vehicles. Where up in the north side, there's, yeah, much lower vehicle ownership. And the next slide will show, if you want to advance, Justin. Next map on the left, these are households with zero vehicles. So homes in this area are able to live without having to own a vehicle, get around by transit. And you can see the Grand Bus there. The dark red line is right through the center of that area. And then the map on the right shows those at where the population is at 200% or lower of from the poverty line. So these are people that can really benefit from saving the money from owning vehicles. That is our findings. So I'll turn it back over to Kim.
Thank you, Justin and Paul, for walking us through some of the research findings. I think keywords that came out are frequency, fixed route, and making sure that we don't surround any type of transit with just parking. That's not where we need to be. That is not a win. So thank you very much for that. We need to make sure that we're integrating these into the communities that we have in St. Louis. And so let's pivot now before we open for Q&A to Scott Ogilvie with the City of St. Louis to provide us an update on where we actually are with this study in the Northside-Southside corridor. And there it is again, and why we pivoted to bus rapid transit. So Scott, we're going to turn it over to you for an update, and then we're going to jump in with Q&A about research and where we are with that bus rapid transit study locally.
Great. I assume you can see my screen, Kim?
We can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Scott Ogilvie, and I work for the city's Planning and Urban Design Agency. And I'm going to walk through what we've been doing with bus rapid transit throughout 2026. I know that probably most people at this webinar will be familiar with the city and bi-state's Green Line Metrolink light rail planning that was happening in recent years. And so I just want to explain the pivot from the light rail planning to BRT. There's a very serious effort made to advance a light rail project. And over the last several years, we took that project from a conceptual project to 30% engineering. So we learned a lot through that engineering process. And I think the key takeaways are by the end of that process, the cost of the project we realized was really going to exceed the city's fiscal capacity to pay for it, first of all. And second of all, the project absolutely needed federal funding through the FTA. And the score of the project and the ridership of the project suggested that it was going to be difficult for this project at roughly $1.2 billion to compete for a sufficient amount of federal funding to make it a viable project. So rather than, stopping and saying, what do we do, throwing our hands up, quitting, the city pivoted and bi-state pivoted very quickly to looking at bus rapid transit. And there are some real silver linings with the pivot to BRT. I think the most important silver lining is that the project can be significantly longer than the light rail project would have been. So it can reach more St. Louis residents in more neighborhoods, both south and north in the city of St. Louis, and provide a greater level of service to more people than that light rail project could have. So I'm going to walk through, this is the project website, and we are in the phase where we are working on finalizing route selection. So this website is available to the public, and we are still taking comments on the route selection. But
I'm going to jump in 1 second. So you are on a Wikipedia page, so I'm not
oh,
sure if that's where you
that
want to
is
be.
not what I
Or,
wanted to be sharing.
well,
No.
I wasn't sure about that. So I thought maybe we might want to be on the Green Line page. We were there
Yeah.
for a second, but then we moved to Wikipedia.
Oh, I don't know why that happened. Okay. Are we back to,
We are on the Green Line now, so we are
uh,
good to go.
you're
Sorry, I
just
didn't
gonna
mean to interrupt.
leave me hanging there. Okay. Thanks for alerting me to that, Kim. Okay. So part of what we're doing is not just talking about um this St. Louis Bus Rapid Transit project, but we are trying to do some education around what bus rapid transit is, because there is no BRT project corridor currently in the city of St. Louis. And so we want to talk about the distinctions between a traditional bus service and bus rapid transit. So I'm going to go through some of the key distinguishing features between those two services. So number one is, and I also want to say, that we are aiming high on this St. Louis project. We really intend to build, I want to put a stake in the ground that we are intending to build one of the best BRT corridors in the country. So that means the majority of the project will have a dedicated guideway or dedicated bus lanes. In this case, in St. Louis, that is primarily going to mean center running guideway, just like light rail would have been. So the bus is not interacting with other vehicular traffic. That speeds it up. A little bit of a nice thing, BRT compared to light rail, is that it does offer a little bit more flexibility for left turns across the guideway, for emergency vehicles to use the guideway, like fire trucks or ambulances, during emergency response. So that'll be the vast majority of the project will have dedicated bus lanes. Transit signal priority, which is the bus being able to communicate with traffic signals to reduce delay. So this might mean if a bus is approaching a signal that is about to turn yellow, it can hold that signal on green for a little bit so the bus can proceed through the intersection without having to stop and wait for that signal cycle. It might also mean a bus who is waiting at a light, gets to move first to go through the intersection when the signal changes, to keep the bus moving quickly and efficiently through the corridor. A really key feature is that we are not talking about bus stops. We are talking about bus stations. These would be very comparable to light rail stations. So, these are platforms, these have canopies, they'll have a certain degree of enclosure, and they'll have other features at the platform, like, information, real-time information, and it'll be a comfortable place for people to wait for the next bus. Service frequency is extremely important. So this service will be, roughly the same headways as the light rail system. So people don't have to do so much planning ahead for when a bus is going to arrive. They can have confidence that if they go to a station, that there will be a bus there relatively soon. Also, a key distinction is that BRT, it's only a station-based service. So it's not stopping everywhere somebody, pulls the string. That means it runs on a much more consistent time frame and is less subject to delay for those passengers who are disembarking. Level boarding at these station platforms. So that means people do not have to use stairs to get onto the bus. This is a great feature for all riders, but especially any rider who might have a mobility limitation. Also speeds up boarding for all riders, so there's less kind of dwell time at the station. And distinctive branding of the bus so that people really understand this is a permanent investment. And it'll be easily identifiable that, a long-term investment in transit has been made through the whole corridor. You'll see the bus lanes, you'll see the stations, and you will be able to identify the buses running on this corridor. And then Off-board fare collection, so not having to directly pay the bus driver when you board the bus, pay ahead, just like Metrolink. So this speeds up boarding as well. Real-time information at the stations. So it's important for us to talk about how other cities across the United States, in many cases, have either pivoted to BRT for certain projects or have really built the backbone of their transit system or their higher frequency transit system around BRT from the start. So an example of that is Albuquerque, who runs several bus rapid transit corridors. They call it ART or ART, and the combination of several routes that they have is carrying over 2.5 million passengers a year right now, in a smaller market, of course, than St. Louis. In St. Paul, Metro Gold Line, which I got to ride from end to end last week, is a BRT project, really significant BRT project that opened about a year ago in St. Paul. This is an interesting project because it built a dedicated guideway kind of from downtown St. Paul out to the east suburbs of the St. Paul area. So this BRT system has its own road, a couple of its own bridges. We don't have to do that in St. Louis, but it shows that you can make a really significant investment in BRT that has the same permanence as a light rail investment. An earlier example of BRT is Emerald Express in Eugene, Oregon, which has been running for almost 20 years now. Again, just to show the permanence of these investments. And one that some folks in St. Louis might be familiar with because it's fairly close is the Indigo Red Line in Indianapolis, which is a few years old. And I think you get a good feel for maybe roughly what a station will look like looking at that image. So as we get into our project, what we've been doing over the last 9 months and doing fairly quickly is figuring out what a BRT route should look like. You'll see here, this was where light rail planning ended with a primarily Jefferson, Parnell, and Natural Bridge alignment. There's some differences in how we have planned to do bus rapid transit. The key difference is that we want BRT to integrate with Metrolink at the Civic Center station downtown. This is a great place for transfers. You've got the 2 Metrolink routes at that location. You've got over a dozen connecting bus routes at Civic Center Station, so it adds a lot of connectivity across the city of St. Louis. You also have Amtrak and Greyhound at that location, and it's right downtown, so you're right by a lot of municipal services. So that's maybe the biggest distinction between how the light rail planning was going and how we're doing the BRT routing. So we've looked at 5 route options. They all go to Civic Center, and then moving north, they kind of go through and exit downtown in a different manner. This option 1A on the left, Olive and Jefferson, and then down here, option 2B, which is Tucker and Florissant, are the 2 route options we carried forward. We had a series of open houses, public meetings on these route options a couple weeks ago, and we still have comment open through this website if people want to weigh in. We're moving very quickly towards selecting one of these options to then move into further engineering. So when we do the evaluation, we're looking at all kinds of factors. The biggest thing is, what's going to support the most ridership and reach the most St. Louis residents. Jefferson and Florissant, they're both viable routes. Florissant serves a little bit more of today's residents, a little bit more affordable housing. The Jefferson route maybe has a little bit more future development potential around it. So we're kind of in the final analysis to get to a route selection, which will then be blessed by East-West Gateway in the coming months. So here, just a little bit of our screening criteria for the 2 routes. There's also a little bit of a distinction between them because Jefferson and Parnell has been recently completely reconstructed. while the fluorescent, the roadway is pretty deficient and offers an opportunity to reconstruct that roadway as part of the project into an appropriate width, adding a lot of safety features to that road, which currently is in pretty poor state of repair. These maps, you can zoom in to get a closer view of the route. So as you'll see, this is option 1, Shoto, 18th Street, Civic Center, and then going west on Olive, and then north on Jefferson and Parnell. This is a little bit more like the route for light rail planning. And then the second option is the fluorescent option. So Tucker through downtown, kind of right through the center of downtown from an east and west perspective, along Florissant, and then joining back up with Natural Bridge. And as I zoom out, you'll be able to see that both of these projects are about 11.5 miles long. Along Natural Bridge, they go essentially to the city-county line at Goodfellow. They also extend about 3/4 of a mile further south. And we're looking at more than 20 stations on either of these routes. So as we get into route selection, I might scroll past these and just talk about, what is coming soon. We expect East-West Gateway to finalize a route as soon, potentially as next month in June. The project is in something called project development with the FTA, which is an acknowledgement that the FTA that this is a real project, that we are working carefully with them to make sure we're doing everything possible to set the project up to receive federal funding. It started as a light rail project. We've gotten an extension through FTA to maintain in project development for another year, and we are going to be working very hard once the route is finalized to get into the engineering phase, so we can get to that 30% or 30% plus engineering level by the middle of 2027. And then the goal is to enter into what is called entry into engineering with FTA, which continues that engineering process until the project is completely engineered and hopefully then can receive federal funding. There are lots of questions people have as we do these open houses about what is the project going to look like? What do the stations look like? What is the roadway going to look like? Where is parking going to be or not be? We are going to get into all of that stuff in the next phase where we get into engineering. People are also very curious to know, what will happen with other bus routes? Will there be changes? Will we keep running bus routes on their same routes? Will we, mix what I call like local bus service along the BRT route, which is a possibility. So that's all coming in the coming months. And we'll be able to answer a lot more detailed questions that residents have had as we've started this route planning process. So that is where we are. I would encourage folks, if they haven't already, to log into this website, leave a comment if they have a preference on the route. We are still taking comments as we get towards that final route selection. And Kim, I think I can wrap up there. That works for you.
Perfect. So thank you to all of our panelists. Very informative. I think there were some critical keywords that we heard throughout: frequency, permanence, access, making sure that we're in the community. So I think this was really informative for those who attended today. And let's open it up now for question and answers and see what people have and want to know further about. So going back to the study results, we do have one question, and I think this one really goes to Paul, Justin, and Charlie. What do you believe is the most important message coming out of the research that needs to get out about the impact of high capacity, high frequency transit on property values? What is the message and who needs to hear it? Anyone?
I can go ahead and take that first. I think what we kind of saw in the research and also in our literature review is just that like there's this strong relationship between transit and property value, and that it is very important for us to continue to invest in transit, not just for increasing our property value, but really making communities where people like want to live. So I think the idea for me is that getting that out to communities, getting that message out to communities that like investment in transit is like investment in communities. And so that's why we want to continue investment in transit.
Great.
I think it
Thank you,
speaks to
Jason.
I think it speaks to a lot of different audiences. For economic development, we see that transit-oriented development matters, that people want to locate businesses near transit. For potential homeowners, it's if you want to be looking for a home that's going to gain more in value, be looking near transit. It's going to improve your mobility. It's going to improve the value of your home. For current homeowners, it means that if transit's coming near you, this is going to be good for you and your home value. It's great for wealth building in that regard. And for those that are looking to grow St. Louis, this transit is an asset that as people look to see where they want to live, as we look to compete with other regions, transit is a value proposition that if we have transit, we are more attractive to folks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I think this next question goes to you, Scott. So with these new alignments, both of them serving the Civic Center station, which wasn't on the original LRT alignment, could this be an opportunity to reimagine the Gateway Transportation Center? And is this an opportunity for TOD over there as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, one of the, let's say the the deep dives we have to do on the engineering level is how we integrate the BRT service with that existing station. And we can potentially consider how it connects to Gateway, which is for folks on the call who maybe don't know, that's where Amtrak and Greyhound bus service is. Um, and yeah, I think there's definitely an interest from bi-state and maybe playing a little bit bigger role than they currently do today in that facility. Um, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because, you know, I know people are taking a look at it, but you never know how things will pan out. The overall location, I think there's some potential for TOD, but at the same time, there's also the rail corridor, there's the highway that's right there, and there's some sort of permanent municipal buildings there. So you've got City Hall, you've got the building I'm in right now, 1520 Market, you've got Enterprise Center. There is certainly some potentially around the old courthouse and, between, which is next to City Hall and the parking lot there. Obviously, the city would love to see redevelopment of that site um, at some point.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these projects. And I think, Justin, you had a quote that said BRT generates real estate values today that are 6 times greater than the cost of the construction of the project itself. So when we look at the current project that is being studied in the Northside-Southside corridor, what does funding of that project look like? What will be necessary to move that project forward, Scott? And what does the local match for that project currently look like?
Sure. So I can give you sort of an order of magnitude cost. This isn't a exact cost because we haven't got into engineering, but it's just to sort of compare to the light rail project. So for our, let's say 11 and a half miles, we're going to be in roughly, let's say plus or minus 50% right now, the $400 million range, which includes, a lot of roadway improvements and reconstruction through those 11 and a half miles. The city of St. Louis has been collecting Prop 1 sales tax to support Northside-Southside transit expansion since 2017. We've just been putting that money in the bank and saving it for, this project. And we would hope to get about 50% of the project costs from the federal government through the FTA. So, we could have 200 million or more for the project provided by the FTA, and the rest of the funding coming locally, primarily from the city of St. Louis through that Prop 1 sales tax.
Great. And just some clarifying questions. Would this project move forward without federal funding?
Um, it would be a much better project with federal funding because there'd be a lot more financial capacity to do the let's say the premium project that is really what we're going for. Um, it is we are very determined to access that federal funding. If for whatever reason, that wasn't a possible. And I should also say there's every reason to believe that as a BRT project with FTA scoring criteria, this is absolutely a competitive project for federal funding. But you never know what the future holds. If for some reason it wasn't available, I think we would have to slightly reconsider some of the project features. But this has been the goal of the region to expand high capacity, high quality transit north and south for decades. And we feel as a city that we are really leading towards that goal by passing the tax, by investing a lot of money in planning and engineering these projects. And, if we had to recalibrate somehow because of a different federal funding environment, I suppose we would. But I don't think we would I don't think there's any reason to think that we wouldn't try to keep pursuing the goal of transit expansion to North and South St. Louis.
Great. Thank you, Scott, for that clarification. So let's go back to our CNT experts and let's talk, with regards to the messaging coming out of this research. We do have naysayers. Every city has naysayers when it comes to public transit. So from your perspective, what result would resonate the most effectively to underscore the need for transit investment? Justin
Oh,
or
Paul.
Paul?
Justin, do you have an answer for this? I mean, that's a great question. The real estate industry, I think would be a great, um, voice in this, just to emphasize the asset that transit is when purchasing a home. Freeing up the cost of owning a vehicle, with car payments and gas prices and insurance and registration and parking, that just allows home buyers to purchase more home. Years ago, CNT worked on something called the location efficiency mortgage, which really did consider the location, and provided ways for borrowers to access more money to purchase a home. So yeah, I'm not the best with PR or marketing, but it seems to me that real estate um, um, industry could really be a strong voice in this.
Thank you, Paul. Justin, did you want to add anything?
I think the frequency argument that Paul put in place, like just showing that clear relationship is like the better the better frequency that the transit is. And I think a thing that we've seen in our research and our like other work is also just like the reliability of service is like really valuable as well. But that frequency increase, I think really leads to a clear pattern that is like this is why you invest in higher quality transit to be able to provide service. And I think looking at the green line, this idea that you're going to have longer service hours so you can go do more things beyond your commute is also like really valuable. But I would think Paul's point about just kind of the location efficiency is something that we think a lot about is a really valuable one too. And just that where you choose to like live, I think really matters for how you're going to be able to get around. So like having transit as asset for you to be able to get to work, and also kind of places, amenities is like super important. And then also thinking about just like the possible savings of you just even not having that, having sort of more proximal sort of development to transit, I think builds like urban environments, which also help to make it so you don't have to drive or take transit for all your trips. Like that idea that you're going to be located near things that you need to get to. So maybe more of your trips can even be like pedestrian trips too. It's like it's kind of a combining factor there.
Great. So we talked a little bit about the permanence of systems like bus rapid transit, and we have that permanence in St. Louis when we look at light rail. So can you talk a little bit about what opportunities you saw in looking at other cities around a system that is permanent versus a regular bus line that can easily be rerouted or moved depending on transit planning at that agency, and they decide to reroute that maybe a couple blocks over? What is that benefit of that permanence when you have a bus rapid transit system with permanent stations or a light rail? What does that do for this conversation about property values and economic development opportunities?
Yeah, I think this is actually something that I was thinking about as we're having the conversation. Just
Yeah.
like it's a next value, as the next sort of question for the
Yeah.
study you want to do is like really digging into kind of those comparative use cases against, I think, like the level of BRT. But I really think it goes to our point about like the analysis we did. We looked over 4 years and we looked over like 8 years because we wanted to, you want to look over the longevity. It takes a while for people to like think about moving in and for those property values to see increases. We definitely saw more increases in that second kind of tranche. And I think the idea is that, the more reliability that people have and like the understanding that folks say that this is going to be something that's going to be here, like allows for that community growth and that community development. And so I think it showed up in our data just in the frequency for the ride, because I think that kind of speaks to like the early stage of like, well, this is something that we can count on. This is a route that we can count on that we know is going to be valuable. And so I think the city and just like agencies showing investment in a corridor, like that value plays out. So it's like when you're putting something in place, like really making sure that it's like high quality transit service from a frequency perspective, and then also from the station infrastructure. We've been working with the CTA in Chicago on a projects where we think about just like even things like bus shelters and like benches are really valuable for a corridor. And so I think it's like kind of extrapolates as you go beyond that, you're going to see more value and like more people kind of moving forth, because like the arc is not the 1 or 2 year arc. Like people aren't moving in. You need to like show some like longer term investment to, I think, get some of those values. But it's a great like research question, and we'd love to like, I think, continue to dig into just like what features I think are the most impactful. But we definitely saw that like BRT as a kind of enhanced like bus service like showed the real value.
Good. Thank you. And so, Scott, pivoting to you with that same question, when during the community engagement process, are you hearing from residents and riders and stakeholders? Do they understand the permanence of bus rapid transit in this community since it is a new technology? And what messaging do you think needs to get out there on what that impact would be for St. Louis?
Sure. So I think many people are understanding that. And I think as we get further into the project engineering and we have more renderings and more images of what the project will look like, I think that will help further that understanding. This is a big project, and it is a big BRT project. This is not a light touch project at all. Um, when we build this, it's going to be, very apparent to anybody on these streets that a permanent investment has been made in this transit service, and we would expect to run it for, the rest of my life. I think, it's a big investment. We to think a little bit more about other things we as a city are doing that can like support and enhance this investment. We're of course right in the middle of completely rewriting our zoning code. Um, the whole zoning code is moving towards what I would call a more transit supportive format. It's doing all kinds of other stuff too, the new zoning code. But because we're right in the middle of that, and we are going to be settling on this route very quickly, the new zoning code can really incorporate the route into the appropriate zoning designations all through the corridor and near station areas. So I think there's going to be really positive alignment there. So that, you know, the point of building the service is so, somebody in North or South St. Louis can walk out their front door, access a station, go to work, connect to the MetroLink system, and the zoning code will be fully supportive of that happening. So we have appropriate development in station areas.
Great. Thank you, Scott. So, Charlie, this one goes back to you. We are so grateful to the St. Louis Realtors, to Charlie and to Hugh for partnering with us on this research. We think it's really important to, when we look at public transit, to look at the entire picture, not just that ride from point A to point B, but all of the benefits that public transit delivers to the region. And so, we had a question about who would be the best to deliver the message. But I think the realtors are a force to be reckoned with, and we would love to see them as one of the messengers to deliver the message about the importance of these projects. But Charlie, what do you think from a realtor's perspective? Is this something that is a top priority for the realtors, and can you all be messengers on the benefits of a project like this?
Absolutely. We want to be good civic citizens as realtors and as the Realtor Association, where we're promoting good things in St. Louis, and the expansion of transit is absolutely one of those. I think one of the challenges we see right now is, and Scott touched on this, is a lot of folks in St. Louis don't know what bus rapid transit is. They hear bus and they stop there because bus rapid transit doesn't look like anything we have in St. Louis. It behaves more like light rail than it does a bus. So how we help get the word out about that, I think, is important. But from a realtor's perspective, this study, I think, is a key piece of what we can do too. We heard folks that were opposed to transit saying that if transit comes by their house value is going to go down. And we knew from national research that wasn't true. So this study is a piece of how do we correct misinformation as well as show the value of transit so that people know this is an economic development tool, it's an economic mobility tool, and something that's going to drive long-term prosperity in St. Louis.
Great. Thank you, Charlie, and thank you for your support of this and transit in general. So we're getting to the end of our program, but I always like to end each of our webinars with a key takeaway from each of you to our audience on the opportunities you see based on this research and where we are in the region with regards to the Green Line study. So this is an opportunity for you to leave that lasting message as people jump off today and head back into their work day or their relaxing retirement day. What do they need to know about this research and what's happening in St. Louis right now?
From my perspective, I will just say that we are setting the bar high for what this project can be. And we're moving forward with the project as quickly as we responsibly can, I would say. We have not stood still, and everybody's really putting their shoulder into advancing what we hope will be a great project.
Great. Thank you, Scott.
I'd say first, CMT and CNT on the same project was confusing. I don't recommend that. But if St. Louis wants to compete for residents, talent, and investment, we have to think about how transportation, housing, and economic development work together. How we connect North and South St. Louis, as well as the rest of the metro system. I think that's a critical conversation. And right now, there's exciting things happening in St. Louis. How do we make sure we get the word out about that?
Great. Thank you.
And yeah, and I think I'll say the takeaway, I think it's really valuable, like understanding of like frequency, and that is like I really echo Charlie and sort of Scott. It's an exciting time in St. Louis, a really excited project. Like as you can see from the research, like that the Grand Avenue like bus line has had really strong like impact. So I think like an improved like Northwest corridor is gonna be, or North South corridor, excuse me, is just gonna like continue to sort of exacerbate that growth.
Perfect. Paul?
Yeah, I agree with all these statements, and it's exciting to see this project unfolding in St. Louis. But yeah, the message that I think is key is yeah, high quality, high frequency transit service where you don't have to check the schedule before you walk out the door. You don't have to worry about waiting 20 minutes for the next bus in the cold or the rain. That's the service that people really value, I think, and yeah, and BRT would be that. The Grand Bus is serving that now, it seems. So yeah, this is great.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you today for joining us and having this conversation with us this morning. We think it's really important that people understand the impact to housing and to property values if you do invest in public transit. Thank you to everyone else who has joined us this morning for this important conversation. The research will be available on our website as well as a recording of this webinar that can be used as a reference for your peers or your colleagues who may not have been able to join us today. So don't forget to check that out. But our real call to action would be is also check out the Green Line website. This is your opportunity to weigh in on the alignments. There's two on the table, Jefferson as well as the Florissant route. So please check out the alignments, get involved, get educated on what's actually being discussed here in the city of St. Louis on bus rapid transit, and make sure you weigh in. This is your opportunity as a St. Louisan and as a community to make a difference with public transit. So thank you everyone for joining us today. If you're not a member of Citizens for Modern Transit, here's our plug. Consider joining us as a member as we continue to build momentum around public transit, and look for our upcoming events at cmt-stl.org. Thank you and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.